Hello, class. This is a recording that I'm going to do regarding intermediate sanctions that we did not get to cover in class. It is not the most complicated material, but I thought I would at least present to you some of the basics of what we know about intermediate sanctions and the different types of intermediate sanctions. Let me get a slideshow going here. Jump the gun there. Yes, so intermediate sanctions, what defines intermediate sanctions is um, really a compromise between prison and community corrections. It's just putting a stronger emphasis on supervision while you're in the community, and less on trying to. It's in a sense way. It's trying to create a more secure foundation for being in the community for people who are higher risk. Um, these are obviously more flexible and less expensive than prison. Prison's definitely going to be more expensive than these, but these are going to be a little bit more expensive than your typical straightforward probation or parole. So um, the examples that we're going to look at: split sentencing, shock probation or parole, shock incarceration, mixed sentencing, intensive probation, and home confinement. Um, 2/3 of offenders who engage, according to one study that your textbook cites, who engage in these types of sanctions complete them successfully. It's a little bit of higher success rate than you can find with regular probation and parole. So that definitely they're more expensive, of course. So that's going to play out. Um, a key ingredient to a lot of these sanctions and probation and parole is community service. Community service is not, a lot of you that we've all done community service to some degree, volunteer work. If you're a Tennessee Promise student, you've done some community service. However, this is a different type of community service that is not so exonerated. It's more of it's more of trying to get you to pay back the community that you have violated. And also at the same time, in some cases, when you see them walking on the side of the road picking up trash, it is also a way of, in a sense, public shaming as well. And definitely something that you find for people who cannot pay their fines. Instead of sitting in jail, they can use community service. So yes, split sentencing is exactly basically what it sounds like. You're splitting, the judge is splitting a sentence into multiple components. This is, excuse me, 90 days in jail, 2 years in probation, 100 hours of community service. So you have 90 days in jail. That's your first component. Secondly, you're going to go on probation. And while you're on probation, you're going to be doing community service. This is a standard sentence. I mean, this is split sentencing is used quite frequently, and particularly for people's first felony or misdemeanor. This is a typical arrangement. Shock probation and shock parole, on the other hand, is not as frequently, but 50% of states do use this. And the notion of shock is something that we need to suss out and break down. But basically what is happening is that you are being thrown into prison, and then you are released back into community corrections. So the shock comes in two different waves. First, you're shocked from being exposed to prison culture. And you don't realize, though, that you aren't going to be there for very long, because you are shocked again by being released without being sort of aware. In a sense, it's like the scared straight phenomenon, in which you're thrust into a environment that you are definitely vulnerable for spending some considerable time to, and then you are pulled back out into reality, and said, hey, that's where you could be if you don't straighten up, scared straight. So shock parole, shock probation, this is something that typically relatively short time held in prison before you're released back out into the community corrections world. Shock incarceration, on the other hand, is a something that Tennessee uses it. I've read 41 states online use it, but then your textbook says 30 states and the federal government wants used it. It's a definite. It had its high points and being used in the 1990s and 2000s, early 2000s, but the studies have shown that it is not as successful as it was once thought to be. Basically, it is like a boot camp. You are thrown into like a militarist, paramilitary type of environment in which you are exposed to a very, very structured regimen, physical training, labor, school, education, very much used for not heavy felons, but people who are repeat offenders, like people who have had DUIs in their past, on their second or third DUI. So yes, it's people who are really on the edge of trouble and skirting it. And this has been shown to actually be very successful with young offenders, juveniles in particular. But with adults, the results are very mixed and not so clear cut that this is, because these are a little bit more expensive, right, than prison. I mean, than community corrections. Not as expensive as prison, although not much less, actually. You do save some money, but the impact on recidivism is negligible, according to the research. That's shock incarceration. Mixed sentencing. I'll play this video real quick. I just found this great example of what mixed sentencing is about. This is in, what state is it? I forget, we'll find out.
A weekend jail sentence. A former funeral home owner pleaded guilty to stealing the money his customers prepaid for funerals. Well, today, Julio Gonzalez Roel was sentenced to 42 months in jail, but only on weekends and major holidays. His wife received probation. This all comes after an 8 on Your Side investigation that started back in 2014. And investigator Shannon Bankin joins me now. You've been following this case for years, but weekend jail?
I know. It does happen, but it is unusual. In the state attorney's office, they reached this goal with one goal in mind, and of course, that was restitution for the victims. They want Gonzalez Roel and his wife to work in order to pay back nearly $178,000.
What do you guys have to say to the victims?
There's no
Smugness, even after Lucia Gonzalez Roel and her husband Julio Gonzalez Roel were sentenced, accused of stealing prepaid funeral money from their clients at JGR Funeral Home in Tampa. You don't have anything to say?
I have nothing to say.
What about the people that are sitting here watching this tonight, knowing that you took their money?
We didn't take anybody's money.
We didn't take their money. We sold the business to new owners, and the new owners took the money. So maybe.
Then why didn't you fight the charges?
The new owners. When you do this, we did it in the best interest of everyone.
No remorse here, but inside the courtroom, the pair pleaded guilty to their roles in what state investigators called a scheme to steal nearly $180,000 from grieving families. 8 on Your Side broke this story in 2000.
So yes, the reaction to the accused there, it makes you kind of really sort of regret that they are going to be in the community. They sounds like they are very unrepentant and not admitting, although they do admit in court, but not in public. Interesting. So yes, the interest here is so that people can live in the community and continue with their working lives, often for paying back fines and for paying back the victims. This is just a great example of that. But also for the offender, the sentence of jail, whenever you have a job and you have rent, you have family, there's an interest to keep somebody functional if you're not a liability to the safety and security of the community. So definitely something that is not for everybody, but mixed sentencing is something that definitely is useful. Weekend jail, it's got its place. Intensive probation, IPS. This is something that was originated in Georgia, 1983. And this is IPS is basically putting regular probation on steroids. For people who are on IPS, you often find a situation where they are at high risk of reoffending, potentially violent offenders. And this comes in the world of parole as well, intensive parole, but in this case, we're talking about intensive probation. As you see, 5 face-to-face contacts per week, mandatory curfew and employment, weekly check-in arrest of arrest records by the probation officers, unannounced alcohol drug testing, 132 hours of community service, automatic notification if client is arrested. And this is a pretty successful program. And it is, however, pretty also intensive, as the name refers it to as. It's intensive for a team of probation officers to have to take on. So it does take a team approach to this, and it's going to take money, finances, investment. And like I said, it has shown positive results, and other states have adopted it as a result. But again, it requires lots of resources. IPS. Remote location monitoring. This is the electronic version of GPS. So there's GPS, then there's remote location monitoring. Electronic monitoring is EM technology. And this is being put on with a bracelet as a receiver for some sort of transmitter that's set up in your home that is going to be activated when you are there. And there's 2 different forms of electronic monitoring, active versus passive. Active is you are you being in the home is being monitored. And so if you move away from the range of your home, then it signals an alarm. On the passive end, they call you, and you are supposed to be in your home to then respond to the call, and your monitor will signal that you are there. So that's active versus passive. Again, these forms of monitoring are limited. The electronic ones are, because they only indicate whether or not you leave or enter a range. You don't know if you go beyond that range, and as far as you know, if you go beyond it, but you don't know where you go. So that's the issue. So we do have GPS. And that has definitely taken this to a new level. Electronic monitoring went from 1987 to 826 offenders using it to 2005, 75,000. So it really got amped up and used a lot after the successes of, of the prison boom in the 80s and 90s. To find an outlet for putting people back in the community, this was a good answer. GPS is definitely much more frequently used today than what you find with electronic monitoring. It's used in an abundance of across the country, most notably in California. Here's an example of it being used in Ohio.
I've had people from over the Rhine to people in Indian Hill and everywhere in between.
They come from all walks of life, but have one thing in common.
Did you rape a patient at Mercy Anderson?
A doctor accused of rape, a 21-year-old charged with assault, a social worker accused of stalking, all on house arrest, all wearing the same piece of jewelry, an electronic monitoring bracelet.
Just need your shoe off, sock off the heel of your foot.
On this day, I'm being fitted with a bracelet to test the limits of house arrest.
Or this red circle represents the area you cannot enter.
They test us daily.
Hey, what's going on?
On a surprise home visit, deputies catch this man drinking beer.
You just had this too, didn't you? It's cold. The can's still cold. It's got sweat on it.
No drinking, drugs, or weapons while on house arrest.
That box on your ankle is not a constant reminder?
In Hamilton County, hundreds of people are on house arrest.
Big brother is watching all the time.
60 of those are outfitted with global positioning satellite bracelets that track their every move.
So we know where people are on a perpetual basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
With my GPS bracelet, deputies have set up an exclusion zone that limits when and where I can travel. It's designed to keep an offender away from the victim. When I drive into that zone,
He just hit the exclusion zone right here.
I receive a warning from deputies.
They've let me know right now that I'm in an area I shouldn't be.
I'm telling you, it's just too much.
About 55% of the people on house arrest are pre-trial, and for some, the limitations are overwhelming.
You don't have anything on you, do you? All right. Hey, Adam, go ahead and pat him down real quick.
James Harrison, also known as Jessica, is awaiting trial on a domestic violence charge. Even after 15 years in prison, house arrest is driving him crazy.
Almost as bad as being in jail.
And I know I'm not supposed to be in this area.
Back on the road, Deputy Brian Hale is watching me closely as I travel through the west side, breaking both the terms of my house arrest and my diet.
Up here on Ross Avenue by McDonald's.
Some people tell Target 5 they like being monitored, including this sex offender.
If I had my choice, I would stay on it for the rest of my life. Because I feel very comfortable that it keeps me in check.
So we're going to go into Kentucky here.
And Deputy Hale is keeping me in check as I head south across the river.
Here's where he's coming across 75, 70.
All right, you get the idea. It's pretty effective. However, it's got its issues. It reduces the failure by 31%. I'm sorry, by 6% than electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring improves the failure rate by 31% over regular probation. So both of these are improvements as far as monitoring and security in the community. Costs are, go up for a GPS, as you see, from $27 a day for a regular parolee or probationer versus $35 a day, $36 a day for GPS. So it goes up, costs do go up. And the more it's used, the more prevalently it's used in a community, the more false alerts that are given. So that's one issue that California has ran into, and has kind of put a little bit of a damper and a little bit of a cap on the spread of the use of GPS. Because what happens is like with Philip Garrido, who had kidnapped J.C. Lee Dugard and kept J.C. Lee Dugard in captivity for over 15 years, I believe it was. He was on GPS, and a former sex offender. What happened was in California was that there were so many clients on GPS. The system was overloaded with false alerts. And so what happens is that with so many false alerts, the authorities stopped responding as attentively to these alerts. And that is basically how Philip Garrido managed to get under the radar of the GPS surveillance in California. And that really, since that has been shown, that was like a national, it was a national story that really gave GPS a really bad rap. And ever since, it has not grown. 2006, it's 23 states had adopted it in 2006. It really hasn't grown since then. So yes, GPS, most important to note of its cost savings, but it's got its issues. All right, that's all I want to say. I hope this was useful and worthwhile your time, and we will see you back in class. Have a good day, morning or night, wherever you might be.